It's time for Myth of the Week.
Right, that song gets me every time. I swear they're saying myth in there. But this comes from a post that was in NEC for Dummies. A lot of people probably saw it. A guy said he was arguing with the inspector, and it says in the manufacturer instructions that it can be installed in short raceways. It gives you a UL number in there, and I went and actually looked that UL number up, and I didn't see anything that said it could be installed in a raceway. Now, there's a difference that this ideal might be saying that you can splice these in short raceways, but that's in a dry location. So where this guy was talking about, he was repairing this. So what happened was the gentleman said that the general contractor cut a line. I don't know exactly what it was. It was probably a branch circuit that fed out to an outbuilding. Well, they tried to pull the wire out, but it was stuck. It wouldn't move. So they decided to use this ideal inline splice and splice it just for like 12 to 14 inches to the other J box, and then make the re-splice it there. Well, I guess the inspector somehow saw him. I don't know. That was the other part. I didn't really understand how the inspector got involved. Maybe, I mean, I know if you're the inspector at Grapevine, James, and you're walking by and see some dude splicing inside a conduit, you might have some questions for him.
I would have.
But it was pretty awesome that we were able to kind of pick this up from this individual and run it for the Myth of the Week, because it was a pretty valid point. Now, what I would argue, and I've done this before with inspectors, is I've actually went and got the UL. I looked up that UL number, and if you have something from the manufacturer that says this is listed and labeled to be installed inside a wet location conduit, I could see the argument. The problem is the inspector is going to say those splices have to be accessible. And if you have to remove 12 inches of dirt to access that splice, then that's not going to be compliant. So it was pretty awesome that we were able to run this week, and I really appreciate you putting it to light, James. And let's get the old inspector angle on it from your perspective.
Well, I started looking at. I actually went over to UL 486C. That was the main UL standard you wanted to go at. And I also looked at what Ideal had here. And the first part of it up there is inline design allows splicing of solid stranded in small raceways. But then when you look down below that, the only thing I see that they're recognizing here is that this is a number 18. And I'm thinking that the conductor cannot be larger than number 18 here. It has to be a number 18, and it gives the max force, which is 3 pounds. And it says if you're at a half-inch KO, you can do 3 of them, and if it's a 3/4, you can do 5, up to 5.
Oh wow!
And I was sort of looking at that, and I don't think everybody looked at that closely. I didn't read all the comments or anything on there. I didn't have time. But that is one thing I would point out here, is this is not just any size conductor from what I can tell.
Right.
And I think this is for number 18, and they give you the numbers here. And if you look up above where it has the features and benefits, it talks about compact size enables 3 to fit through a half-inch KO simultaneously, and this is a low insertion force. Okay?
Right.
And those were the things I was looking at here. And then they had the next part of this that I broke down here. And I started looking at this, and I was like, well, now, if you look at this, it changes a little bit, because it tells me the wire range size was solid 12 to 20 AWG. So
Right.
as I started looking at this, I was like, okay, this is interesting because then when you get into the tin bonded here, they start telling you about the strands and everything here and what they're going to permit, and then they show you where they have the KO opening, and it's and the way I'm sort of looking at this, it's not so much it's in the raceway, it's right there at the raceway, a small raceway where it's coming through, and you're making that connection right there at the KO. And
Yeah.
if you look at that half-inch KO opening, that's what it looks like it's talking about to me. So
True.
I'm not saying, even though it's in the raceway some, it's really where they're talking about is making the connection where it's at the KO, and the conductors were too small. That's what I
Okay.
think they're talking about here.
Okay. Yeah, and like I say, a
So
lot of people were like, I had some funny comments. Were like, "Is that false advertising for my deal?" I was like, "It could be, but I can guarantee this is not a product listed for installation in a wet location."
no, I agree with that. I am curious. Did anybody make any comments about it being in the KO or the knockout
Uh,
is?
no, we didn't get it. I don't think any of them said that.
Okay,
We didn't have very many people. Like I say, everyone nailed the myth of the week this week.
mm,
There was all the comments were pretty radical as far as the inspector's right. Whatever he says is right. Well, if you're the inspector, then I agree. But there's some other inspectors out there that don't have as much knowledge and code knowledge as you. And like I say, I could see if you could find something that says that this is listed in a wet location to be. And like I say, it could be something in that case, like you're saying, where it just needs to get spliced and pushed in the KO a little bit. Maybe that still
that's
could be considered accessible.
that's what I'm thinking this is. And because I'm looking, when I looked here where it's got the dimensions, it's specifically showing where it's in the KO right there. It's not
Right.
saying it's in the raceway. And if you
Right.
go back and you look at this right here, they're basically telling you where it's small raceway, but it's also talking about compact size enables three to fit through what, a half-inch KO simultaneously. And I think what
Right.
they're talking about is it fitting in that KO, and then you have some that's in the raceway there. I don't think this is something where you're just making a splice inside. You made a splice and pulled it through the raceway. I don't think that's the case here. I think this is where you had a short conductor or something, and you're making a splice right there where the KO is. That's what I think it is. But
I agree.
I
I would agree with
uh,
that.
uh, I don't know how everybody viewed this or what their interpretation was, but the way I'm looking at this and the way that this is set up and the way they're showing this is in the KO. This is not in the raceway. I mean, it is in the raceway a little bit, but it's really at the KO where this device is being used.
Well, and I'll have to look that one up because I think we did do the myth on the 6 inches of free conductor. Because there was a myth where people thought that the 6 inches of free conductor didn't have to be spliced or couldn't be spliced. That it had to be 6 inches of free conductor or else you had to repull the cable. So we busted that myth a while ago. I'll have to go through. Just so everyone knows, I am going through and making my Myth of the Week a podcast. So if you guys want to check out the Nat King Code podcast on Spotify, I'm going to start doing them all in a podcast form so that you guys can kind of check these out, kind of go through them. We'll give you the UL. I'll try to give you the UL numbers in the podcast in all that different stuff to kind of so you can go look up the supporting documents and stuff like that, kind of dig into them a little deeper. But it's freaking awesome, James. I think you're 100% right that we've actually had this happen before in some remodel jobs where you only have like an inch of wire,
Hmm.
inch of conductor to work with coming into that J box, and these would kind of work out good to just give you that extra little bit that you could splice onto because you can't tell the customer you're ripping their whole wall out because you only got an inch of wire.
Yeah, I think that's what this is dealing with here. And it is a UL product. it's listed and labeled, and it has a catalog number and everything. And I personally think that that's what it's actually used for. I don't think it's really, can you just install it in the raceway? I think it has to deal where you're making this connection, you don't have much wire, and you're having to go where that KO opening is, that knockout opening. I think that's what this is.
Well, and we've had this before too, where you've had some of those lit mirrors. They're like lit mirrors, and there's all kinds of crazy mirrors that you can install now in the hotels and stuff. But these are the kind of some of the products that you use. Is you actually, let's just say you have a conduit coming into that mirror, then what you're doing is you're taking those splices and you're kind of shoving them back into the conduit, and then you hang the mirror.
Sure.
So it's not that that splice is inaccessible. It's just shoved back in that raceway a little bit. And then if you wanted to take that mirror down, you could still access those splices.
Sure. I think
So,
that's what this is about. I don't think this is just saying you can just do a, a splice in a raceway. I don't think that's what this is saying at all.
yeah, and just for everyone, this myth is busted. You cannot splice in the raceway up underground. So basically, that's what he did, was he was trying to splice in a PVC that was going underground. Is my guess. I don't. He didn't say it was exactly PVC. It could have been EMT, but it was some kind of raceway that went underground, and they tried to just splice about 12 inches just to get them through and get their, because they said the wire was stuck when they were trying to pull it. They said it wouldn't pull out, but they didn't have the truck either. I could have got it out of there.
Well, I am curious. Did anybody even look at it from the knockout perspective? Because that they're very specific on those. How many can be done through a knockout, and have anything to say about the raceway? That's why
Right.
I think that's what they're talking about.
Well, and I went and looked up that UL number,
Hmm.
and the only thing that it referenced was how the splice is made.
That's
It
it.
didn't say anything about going into a raceway or anything.
It doesn't.
But like I say, there is probably solutions that you could come up with in that case, where you could just put like a Carlon box on the other side of the sidewalk, or like a grade box, and then make your splice in there and repull it from the grade box over to your other box or back to wherever it is. There's always You're always gonna have a solution when you have like experience. And James, you ran into this, and like, okay, so if I was on that job and you came over and you're like, hey dude, you can't splice to that conduit, I'd be like, hey, do you have any other ideas what I could do? This is kind of in a parking lot. Is there any kind of boxes that are rated for this or whatever? And this is that the GC is the one that messed this up. So this is kind of on the GC's ticket. So if you said, you know what, they make a traffic box that's rated, that goes in the asphalt, whatever. Like, that's what's so cool about getting along with the inspectors is you can just ask them for solutions, and you're gonna be like, well, I'm not your lawyer or anything like that, but there's some products over here at whatever. You could say, I don't even know off the top of my head, but you could say, at such and such.com, they have some solutions that might help you out. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to tell us, like, oh, hey, this is what you need to use, because then if all of a sudden we use the product you tell us to use as the inspector, that we're going to come back and be like, oh, inspector told me to use, green products. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you never
Hmm.
said to use green products. You just said, there's some solutions that you could do kind of like this. So that's kind of why I like doing this from kind of like an inspector perspective versus I would be, more of the, foreman in that situation. Like, what are we going to do? I'm going to tell the general contractor, like, hey, this is our options. This is what the code says. The code says you can't splice in a raceway. We're not going to be able to just fix this for you unless we do X, Y, Z,
Right.
So it's kind of a two-way street when it comes to the foreman involved on the project, and like the inspector, whatever inspector saw this. I agree with that inspector. I mean, I would not allow that to fly, and it's going to be hard if it doesn't get fixed. Then it's going to get worse and worse and tougher, and you might run into some red tags and stuff like that, and
Sure.
nobody wants to deal with that. So,
All right.
yeah,
Well,
awesome. Thanks for putting that together, James. Appreciate it.
yeah, it might be good to go on the where the people were commenting on it and ask them about the KO, because I think that's what it's all about. I don't think it's about splicing in the raceway.
I don't think we really had anybody that was 100% advocate of splicing the raceway. I mean, except for the original poster, which
Uh,
thanks a lot for bringing it up there, sir. And like I say, I hope we helped you kind of come up with some solutions. If you have any more questions about it, or you want us to figure out some way to help you fix it, like I say, I have no problems going through my big bag of tricks and coming up with some way to get her fixed, code compliant. So
all right.
thanks.